everyone, and welcome to the Checkable Health Podcast. I am your host, Patty Post, founder and CEO of Checkable, where we are making it easier for moms to make healthcare decisions at home. And on the Checkable Health Podcast, we are helping moms create information, digest information that will help them be Dr. Mom at home so they can take care of themselves and their families. Today, I have Ilona Phillips with me, and we're talking about eating disorders with our children. So as a parent, we should be really acutely aware of the signs and symptoms and how to seek out care. And that's what we're going to get into today. So Ilona, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I always welcome the opportunity to spread awareness because that is still lacking too many myths out there. And unfortunately, that can play a really detrimental part in a recovery journey, in the recovery. Yeah.
It is. Do you have any stats to start with of how many are affected with an eating disorder?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And off the top of my head, I don't have anything that I would want to put out there, except one important one that in general, on average, it takes folks 2 to 6 years to seek treatment for eating disorder.
What? Really?
Which is really, really staggering. And unfortunately, as you know, anything chronic is much harder to treat.
Right. And it's continued care that you need.
Absolutely.
So that's a great starting point, because we at Checkable talk about acute non-urgent symptoms. Think of a UTI, strep throat, bacterial vaginosis. Those are a symptom that then you can seek out a treatment plan. But a chronic condition, think of weight management, think of diabetes, think of asthma, think of an eating disorder. And that's where it's identifying the awareness piece. Yep. So let's talk about how to be aware of the signs and symptoms.
Yeah, and that is a tricky one too, right? Because it can start with something seemingly so innocent, like your child wanting to be healthier, sort of in quotation marks, right? And so you might be thinking, oh, it's nothing. They just maybe want to exercise more, or they want to watch what they eat. But really quickly, this can develop into something a lot more serious, particularly for individuals who are predisposed, right? So we know eating disorders are so highly genetically, metabolically, biologically predisposed, right? And
really?
I actually will say nurture and nurture, right? So the environment and the genetic and the biology. And so something so simple, seemingly so simple as, let's say, what we often hear actually, a wellness teacher, right? Teaching kids sort of energy out, energy in. And some, depending on the profile and the background of the child, some of them will take it to a weight loss place. And if they're predisposed to a negative energy balance, it can quickly develop into an eating disorder. So we really have to be vigilant. And of course, we live in a diet culture, right? We villainize foods. So many of us are affected by fat phobia. There's so many factors playing into this. And so the signs and symptoms sometimes can be really seemingly innocent, seemingly nothing, if you will. There are obviously a number of different eating disorders, ARFID being one of them. And ARFID sort of looks at first like a picky eating, right? And we say oftentimes, oh, all kids are kind of picky. But this can escalate a lot further to much more narrow and further narrowing menu of options and quickly develop into other eating disorders from there. So there's so much I could say. I could talk for hours on this, but jump in for any questions. I mean, when you think of signs and symptoms, right, I always tell folks, watch for mood changes, behavioral changes, whether it's exercise, food ideas and attitudes, or, right, if we think of bulimia, we might also watch for things like the child going to the bathroom every time they eat or exercising to compensate for what they have eaten. So a lot of different signs and symptoms to kind of look for.
What you mentioned ARFID, what does that stand? I don't know what that is.
It's a restrictive disorder, and it's much less known. I think most of general population doesn't know about this disorder because, again, it starts as a sort of a picky eating. And there are sort of three different reasons why folks sort of fit into ARFID category. So they may restrict because they had a somewhat traumatic situation with food, right? Let's say they choked on food or vomited on food or saw someone vomit on food. And so subsequently they develop aversion, right, to eating or fear. There's a lot of fear and anxiety. Then there are folks who just never really cared for eating. You know, there are folks who never really had those hunger satiety cues very prominent. Food is just, it's not that eventful for them. That they will eat if you tell them, but you know they're just not driven by hunger. And we know a lot about that sort of that. You know, their appetite hormones and all of these things are very different. And then you have folks who experience sensory difficulties, right? So kids who are very sensitive to textures and smells, and that can again, you know, lead to ARFID and why they are avoiding certain foods. And so, actually, in ARFID, interestingly enough, the foods are oftentimes not the foods that they're not what they like. Kids with ARFID or even adults with ARFID often like the predictable foods, right? So McDonald's chicken nuggets and French fries are sort of consistent in texture and even quantity, but it's not body image driven. It's just driven by, do I know what I'm gonna get?
Right. That's so interesting. So if that is what they're continually wanting and that's what they'll devour,
That's right.
then is that something that you should be like, why aren't you eating this broccoli and chicken and rice that we have at home?
That's right. That's right. And you know, so folks with ARFID oftentimes are then low in iron and other deficiencies because that menu is so narrow.
So when you look at the psychological side of an eating disorder, I'm going to use the example of my mom that she doesn't. My dad and I like to eat, like we're foodies. My brother does too, or my brothers. But my mom could like take it or leave it. She's like, I'm just not she likes to cook, surprisingly. But she has pointed it back to when her mother died when she was age 7, that she didn't eat. Like that's when she stopped. She was just like, and she remembers that. And are those things, it's very deep. It is a chronic disorder. How do we deal with this as parents? Who do we seek out help from?
Yeah, so that's very interesting. So on one hand, we have a lot of providers who still sort of attribute eating disorders sort of purely to myths like, oh, it's all about control or it's all about trauma. And you obviously are pointing to that some folks are very affected by that. And listen, my own sister developed anorexia after my father nearly died, right? So yes, there is that, there can be that component. But even in those situations, right, like I navigated that very differently than my sister. So it again points to, right, we have same genetics or very similar to a great degree. We grew up in the same environment and yet both of us dealt with it very differently, right? So I think it's a combination of things. Trauma can certainly be there. It's interesting, you know, it's hard to tell. Obviously, I don't have information about your mom. Has it always been the case where she sort of didn't care for food all that much? Or is that there was maybe, you know, after such a trauma, I would imagine, right, restriction of food, just not feeling like eating. And when you do that, when there's restriction, we further lose sight of hunger and satiety cues, right? So it's hard to tell what's going on sort of within the body and how she has coped. I mean, I would be very curious to see if she would identify this as a problem or do you see it as a problem, right? Are there eating disorder behaviors? The bottom line is, as you know, if we don't fuel sufficiently, it will show up. It will show up in our brain activity, right? Our ability to focus, our ability to connect with folks. So it will show up different places.
And from the teenage side of things, you mentioned about food hormones or hormones in our body that make us either hungry or crave different foods. And with teenagers, of what's happening in their bodies, I mean, how does that present then if you're starving yourself and you have these raging hormones?
Right. And that's so darn tricky, right? I have a 13-year-old at home and hormones are so tricky to navigate for these youngsters. There's so much going on. I mean, I feel for them. And then you add social pressures and all these things. So it's
Yeah.
often hard to tell what is what. But certainly, if you're doing diagnostics for an eating disorder, for individuals born female, right, with female organs, you might be looking at is there loss of menses and stuff like that. But and also in recovery, we then measure, right, hormonal levels.
Oh, really?
That can be super nuanced. So it's not just sort of very all or nothing. Do they have a cycle or not? But you can tell by hormonal levels whereabouts they might, like how close there might be to full recovery, so on and so forth. So it definitely disrupts, hormones actually for all genders, not just females, but with females, we often have this indicator, right? And that is their cycle.
Right.
Is it
Right.
and then affecting bone density and all of these things, right? So, yeah, and teens are also in general social, right? So it's going to start potentially affecting their social life and avoiding meals with friends and worrying about what others are thinking when they are eating, and
Yeah.
there's so much here, so many layers.
So you have so many layers. You have a website, ilonaphillips.com, and then you have Lotus Consulting in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
That's right.
And what's interesting to me about your website is that it's geared towards parents with children that have an eating disorder, which I think is so valuable, because if you go into counseling, you're there for an hour, but then you're left until you see them again. How do we prepare ourselves for that time when we don't have that support system?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I will tell you that my both of my practices are highly behavioral. And so you bet you're going to probably get some homework, and you'll be doing some work outside the sessions, particularly with eating issues. Actually, in the work of kids and teens with eating disorders, the parents really are driving the recovery. They just are.
Okay, yeah.
Because a lot of it is just grounded in refeeding the child. And interestingly enough, I think that not everyone knows this, but regardless of what the eating disorder is, including bulimia, including binge eating disorder, we often find there is a restrictive element. So one of the first primary steps in recovery always is renourishing the child. I mean, it goes without saying with anorexia, obviously, we're going for weight gain and all of that. But for all eating disorders, you really want to stabilize the intake, right? And we typically go for 3 meals, 3 snacks, so that you can, again, restore the hunger satiety cue, so that you can stabilize appetite hormones, so on and so forth. And so you're right. So my ilonaphillips.com website will show you that I have a course for the parents and caregivers of kids and teens with eating disorders. And the reason why I developed this is because, number one, I often get adults or families with a child already sort of pretty deep into an eating disorder. And sometimes they have already tried to find resources. But I also get a lot of folks who are like, and now what? We don't even know. Like, how do we begin?
Right.
Like, what is the roadmap? Like, what are we? Like, what do we do? What is the medical workup? What kind of approach should we take in therapy? And again, I believe in family-based treatment for eating disorders, for kids and teens with eating disorders. And then after that course, which has also just an audio component, right? Because I know parents are busy. I have a membership that supports these parents after they have they have the basic knowledge and tools to understand what eating disorders are really about, what is counterproductive to do, and what is actually helpful to do when a child is recovering. And then the membership supports these parents further on an ongoing basis, right, as they navigate the different phases of recovery.
Oh, that sounds very accessible. That's what with recovery, it's about access.
That's right. That's right. And you're right. I mean, also, there's still such a lack of providers, particularly treating eating disorders. Many have wait lists. And so I don't want that for folks. Like, you could be doing so much in the meantime, starting with the right blood work and medical workup. And, I want parents to feel empowered. They can do things day one, really.
Yeah, that's so nice. The empowerment of like,
That's right.
I can take a first step to helping. It's one step at a time. You've been in your practice for a long time, and I would assume that you have seen changes with the emergence of social media. And tell me about that with your patients and how do you help with that?
Yeah, it is so powerful. And of course, I think at least we are drawing more attention to the impact of social media, especially on our younger population, but really all of us, right? It's all about likes and appearances. And there's a lot of research, especially around girls and social media, but really across the, span of identities, right? So, and it's at their fingertips 24/7. And so, it is such a tough one for us parents, right? To sort of monitor their use of technology and what they are looking at. There are pro-Ana websites everywhere. There are these influencers, wellness industry. So, social media could do a lot of good because if you follow actual providers, if you follow maybe non-diet nutritionists, you can actually learn some great facts and resources, but it can also be used the very opposite way.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one.
And we both are mothers of 13-year-olds. For my daughter, I try to evoke healthy, like I want to be healthy. I want to be nourishing my body. I want to be making my body stronger and not be obsessed with what it is that I'm putting in my body because it's about balance. Just like with anything, with work-life balance, with school, sports, eating is the same thing. And I saw this firsthand with a woman that I knew that was running all of the time. And if she didn't run, she would say in front of her girls, "Oh, I can't really eat today because I didn't run." And I'm like, that is so bad. Or she'd be like, "Oh, I'm 3 pounds heavier. I really have to." And I always just thought, gosh, what are they taking in from that, of that type of conversation with yourself, and then you're projecting it.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking to hear, and it's very common. You're right. Our kids are watching, right? They're learning, just like they're learning the language of money from us or language of relationships. They are learning the language of food and exercise and all of it, right? So that's very, very sad. I feel sad for this person because, I mean, as you said, right, I didn't exercise, I can't eat. We don't have to earn food. Food is a basic need necessary. I mean, imagine if we said, I can't breathe because I didn't exercise today, right?
Yes.
It is heartbreaking, and I hope that this person seeks help.
Right. And it's what's nourishing your body. Your body performs better when it's eating a well-balanced diet rather than always resorting to the McDonald's and something that's of high caloric intake but not nutritional value. That's what I'm trying to talk to my daughter about.
And so that's an interesting one also, right? Because for example, in recovery of anorexia, you do look for high calorie, high fat diet because we can accelerate that recovery so fast. Animal fats are super important in restoring and renourishing the brain. So there's a lot of great research about that. And, there's room for everything, right? McDonald's is not inherently bad. And you keep sort of referring to balance, and I'm there with you. The bottom line is kids are growing. They need to be gaining, and it's going to be really hard to gain from broccoli, right?
Yes, and, right. Good point.
Yeah, and they often grow till early 20s.
Yes,
their bodies are going to be changing, and you're right. How do we sort of preserve this intuition and the inner wisdom, right? Guiding what makes us feel good and what doesn't. So certainly, if I have gluten allergy, true gluten reactivity, right? Which, by the way, a lot of folks say they do, right? And it's not always the case. So you have to have a medical documentation for that. Then, of course, we don't want you to be eating that, right? But then let's not villainize all carbs and bread and all of these things. So
completely agree. Completely.
Big one.
So I have a son that's a wrestler and wrestled in high school, and he was fortunate enough to be of a heavier weight, but he had some really, he was asked to drop weight to then be at a certain weight. And so he took on some seasons, where he would drop weight really quickly. And just seeing how unhealthy it was. And I think of how that behavior can manifest itself even as you get older. Because you remember, like, oh, I lost that weight really fast. It worked. How do you, for the moms out there that have sons, they have the social media influence. They need to walk around with their shirts off in the summer and be looking buff. It's not just to young women that have, or young girls.
Right.
Is that common? Talk about male versus female.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm so glad you bring that up because, listen, eating disorders historically have had a rep of being the disorder of a rich white girl. And I cannot disagree more. It is not true. It is not what we see in my practice. We see diversity of folks, gender, ethnicity, race, you name it, right? And so I'm glad you're bringing that up because that has stopped folks from seeking help. So we have to destigmatize this. Now, will it sometimes show up differently in boys and men? Yes, you already alluded to this, right? It's not, some men are after thinness, some men are after the masculinity, right? Muscle building, all of that. So we just have to keep an open mind as to that, this can show up in so many different ways and have so many different looks. And it also breaks my heart to, listen, I have a background in athletics, working with D1 athletes, right, in college. So what do I even say? Where do I even begin? You see
it's
me
a hard one, isn't it?
You see me struggling. When we send the message out that we can drop weight anytime, what happens when we can't? What does it say about us?
Right.
Are we asking people to change their size of a shoe size? We're not.
Right.
And,
No.
and listen, one of the top predictors of development of eating disorders is actually weight loss and diets. Not
really?
to mention that it can also reset your set point. And folks that are, there are plenty of folks you're dieting, and typically they end up at a higher weight than they begin with, And
Yeah.
diet industry is $1 billion industry, and there's a new diet on the horizon every day.
Yes.
We see them. Somehow they don't work. They're not the magical sort of cure here. So it breaks my heart, but I will tell you that in the athletics, I have seen so many coaches really be more aware and sort of vigilant. And so I have come from coaches checking their athletes' refrigerators for what food is in there, all the way to coaches who are very well versed in eating disorders and spotting in their athletes and really promoting health the right way, And yeah, there are some sports that are more prone to this, right? The visual sports, right? Gymnastics and, like you said, wrestling. This is an important dynamic, the up and down and what it does to their psyche. Yeah, I would be curious if you saw sort of what as a mom, right, watching that, what was your experience like and where did it go?
Yeah, I mean, I think now he is really healthy and he learned a lot about his body of what, I mean, at our house, it's like, what makes you feel good after you eat it? And if you feel like junk, did you eat too much and you feel bad? And don't get obsessed over something. It's just not, it's not worth it. And because I think your energy level, I think you always want to be a high performer, especially a D1 athlete or even someone that's on a varsity team. If you have a competitive nature in you, you want to be the best, but it can't control, nothing can control your life. And that's how we talked about it with him of, are you going to be on the top of the podium, but you'll be at a lower weight class and then your grades are going to be bad because you're falling asleep in class and see what it's doing to your body, like being observant.
Excellent. Yeah, that's excellent. And so did he hear you? Was
Yeah.
he
Yep.
hearing that? Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. And now he was asked to do wrestling in college, and he's like, it's just too much on my body that I can't do it. It is a lot. And I think mentally, gymnasts and wrestlers are very much alike. I mean, they hang out in the same circles too. And I think the obsession with teenagers, as you know, it's hard to get something out of them. Even like, well, how was your day? Oh, my day was great. And then repeat back to them, oh, okay, your day was great. How? Or tell me, like, keep drawing more. And so we work on that. Yeah. My other one has lost actually 45 pounds. But he's 6'3" and was almost 250 pounds. Okay. So he had a lot. He grew really fast. Okay. And he was so hungry, but he wasn't fueling his body and moving his body the way that he used to, because he used to play hockey. Okay. And so he wasn't feeling happy with himself. So it's hard, I think, the conversation as a mom and a dad, when you look at your child, we look at them with no flaws. Right? Like, no, you're perfect. Like, you don't need to change anything. You're at such a young age. Your metabolism is so fast. But he decided that he's like, okay, if I'm going to lose weight over 9 months' time, I'm going to work out. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to get rid of chips, and I'm going to put in there brown rice and chicken. And he was doing things like we bought a half a cow so we could have a whole bunch of ground beef and steak, and he did it healthy. And now you can tell his confidence. He feels better because he did it a good way. But there were times when he was going through this, and then with Will, that as a mother, you think, well, gosh, is his coach the right person to be talking to? Should we be seeking help with a therapist? And you make a great point. In the market that I'm in, you can't access them. They're like out 2 months, 3 months. And by the time that goes, it's like, well, life has totally changed. We're now in a different season. So what do you have parents access care online? What do you do if you're in a rural community?
Yeah, so, COVID, right, helped us to really expand virtual care. So that's the exciting part, that, if you reach out to Lotus, we can certainly see you virtually. That would not have been possible before. If we have openings, right? But we generally do. I mean, we are able to hire fast enough and always sort of have openings, but you're right.
That's so good.
The specialized care can be hard. And so, there's certainly information online, and some physicians are trained. So I would keep reaching out until I would not give up. And that's a hard one, right? For parents. It's so overwhelming already to keep persisting until you find someone. And I'm certainly happy. I mean, if folks ever are struggling to find providers, I'm always happy sort of to advise and help folks to find provider in their community. But it's
a great resource.
I would just keep trying.
Yeah. And it's the most important, it's our greatest gift in life is to be a parent and to be honest about the care that they need and recognizing the symptoms, being aware. That's is right. The message that I hear you really bringing through consistently in this conversation.
That's right. And sort of educating ourselves and also not striving for perfection. None of us are perfect. We are going to make mistakes. We are going to maybe feed into the good, bad foods and good, bad bodies and all of this. But as long as we are learning and really challenging ourselves and being radically honest, and we can always come back and say, listen, when I said this, I actually reflected and I don't think that was the best answer. And I have grown and learned and I want you to hear that. So just also modeling, right? Imperfection.
Sounds so nice. You sound like a great mom too, as well as a great caregiver.
I don't know. If you ask my kids, I don't know what they would tell you. Hopefully.
That's how it is being a mom, right? We're like, we're trying to do better, but I don't have I'm not super mom all the time.
That's right. That's right. And I giggled when you said, it's hard to get things out of teenagers. My trick is to try to get it out of them when we are driving. Somehow the conversations flow better.
Yes.
But also being vigilant, right? Sometimes I have parents who will tell me, hey, I stumbled upon my kid's journal and I was shocked to find out that they have been, logging their workouts or other things. So sometimes we find things accidentally too.
That was a big thing when my kids started driving. I really felt like, oh my gosh, I missed this one-on-one time. Don't get to drive them to school and sports. And you need to find different times to connect with them at night or in the mornings. And you have to be very intentional because days turn into weeks, turn into months. Yeah. And if you don't have that connection, chronic conditions like what you're saying, anorexia, bulimia, it can creep in quickly.
That's right. And as long as they know, right, that they can come back and that they are the trusted place. And, I think that for a few years, we might not see them as much when they are with their peers and whatnot. And hopefully when they're a little bit older, they'll come back again.
They'll come back. Yep. I have one that's sort of coming back now. He's 20. And then one that's 17 that's always gone. So it's just you gotta roll with it and stay connected with
They're
them.
busy. And I think that's good parenting, right? When they're able to take off and be sort of independent, but also not afraid to reconnect. That's ideal.
I really enjoyed this conversation, Ilona. Thank you so much for joining us. What an important topic. And I encourage everyone to go to Ilona's website. And it's is it ILL or IL?
Oh,
you tell me.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay.
It's Ilona, so ILONA, Phillips, PHILLIPS.com, or you can find me at Lotus Consulting in Ann Arbor.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for being a guest.
Thank you.
And everyone, until next time, stay living healthy. Keep getting your information from Checkable Health. And if you loved this episode, please give us 5 stars. That's how we keep on going. And it hits our algorithm so we can get to the top of the health list. And thank you for being a guest once again, Ilona Phillips.
Thank you.